Father, we're so thankful for the rescue. We're so thankful that you bring light into darkness and reveal truth. And I pray that we will see your truth as we open up these pages of Scripture today. I pray that our worship is not done just because the music stops, but instead it continues as we declare that you and you alone are worthy of our attention and our praise. And so we praise you for what you've done already today and what you are about to do. Let us be transformed and changed from the inside out and different when we leave here than when we came in. We praise you for this. In Jesus' name, you can have a seat. Now, I will tell you, I may be completely biased. I know that I am. I'm completely biased, but I'm not alone in this thought that Renew is an amazing, amazing place. Now, for those of you that don't know Renew, I'm not trying to be a braggadocious person or any of those things, but I have to tell you that I think this church is amazing for 100 different reasons. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need to improve and we don't have places that we can grow in. We certainly do. But when I say that I'm amazed at Renew for 100 reasons, it's because there are hundreds of names of people that I would love to declare to you, all of which are serving in amazing ways to make this church so amazing. And that's true because there are hundreds and hundreds of people literally on an ongoing basis that are using their time and their talents and their treasures to serve and to make the name of the Lord famous in the city. And so we call these people diakonos. It's actually a Greek word for a waiter, basically, or a table servant. But you see it all the way through the New Testament, this idea of the diakonos of God, the diakonos of the church, servants of the church, servants of God. People that are serving. Now, in the English language, we would usually define this diakonos as a deacon, but it is, of course, just people that are serving in amazing ways. And the vast majority of the volunteers that we have here at Renew, which again, there are hundreds and hundreds of, they're unpaid. They're investing themselves, and in many cases, they do invest their own money to make the things work that need to work here. And it's in all the ministries. Like, for instance, in our kids' ministry, I don't know if you know this or not, but we have lots of men and women that are serving in our children's ministry. Usually in many churches it's just women, but here we have guys and we have ladies that are serving and doing an amazing job with it on an ongoing basis. In fact, it takes about 40 or so people to just handle the kids' ministry from the little ones down here at Renew on an ongoing basis. And we really could use some more in order to expand, and as Renew continues to grow and as we move into fall and expand, we will need more and more people to do it. But then when you include Awana, which will start up pretty soon actually, Awana is a great Sunday evening ministry where we're pouring the Bible into kids, and it takes about 50 different people in order to run Awana. And so you include those two together, and then you include in other things, like we have events where people are watching kids and taking care of them and training them and teaching them, or you have even our remix group that takes all kinds of different people and volunteers that are doing those sorts of things, and a special needs ministry, which is a fairly new thing to Renew that we began this year, that is flourishing and growing. And you look at the people that are serving in there, people like Katie and Carrie and Lauren and Jerry and Anthony, Miranda, Lady, Amy, Kristen, Remington and Donna and others. When you start to pull all this together, you literally have hundreds of people that are just devoted to our kids, that are serving our kids in a selfless manner. And of course, that's not the only place. When you look at our feeding ministries that we have here at Renew, we have all kinds of people that are continually serving. And the feeding ministry here at Renew is huge. Every week, for instance, we have people like Brad Harmon and Scott Warford that are going and picking up thousands of pounds of food at a distributor here in town and bringing it back. In fact, Scott hurt his hand very badly recently, and that didn't stop him, and he continued to come and continued to serve in that way. Or with our meals ministry, when someone is sick or someone in the family dies, Heather Wheeler organizes a bunch of people to get together and they make casseroles for the freezer. And most of the time we hear from people and go, could you please stop bringing food? Our freezer will not fit it all. And that's always a beautiful problem and amazing as well. And then when we have activities like connections classes, we have people like Jeannie and Joe and Clarissa and others that are cooking to make that work. And then Lunchbox Connection, one of our favorite ministries here. And Lunchbox Connection will kick off in the break times, although it's strange to be talking about Thanksgiving already, but it's coming, and it's coming fast in the way that life works. And we feed kids and their families during the breaks because oftentimes these people will not eat otherwise. And so it takes hundreds and hundreds of people to do this work. And then you have life group leaders, and Bible study leaders, small group leaders, a recovery ministry that meets on Monday night with Ed and Petra that are making a huge impact in people's lives, that have habits and hang-ups and hurts along the way in various places that need help. And they're doing great work with that. Or even our communion ministry. You know, communion ministry, because we do communion here every week, and if you're not sure why, you need to come to a connections class and let me explain it to you. But we do it every week here, but that's a really behind-the-scenes kind of ministry. You really generally never see the people that are getting this ready. My wife, Jennifer, is one of the pieces of that, and she makes the communion bread herself every week. Outside of the gluten-free stuff that's up here, we don't buy that somewhere. She makes it. And she makes it as she's praying for you because she wants your eyes to be open to see all the beautiful things that God has in store for you as you put that in your mouth. That you do it in a beautiful spiritual manner. And it begins from the moment that she puts flour in a special bowl that she set aside just for that. And then there are other people who come early and set all of it up and pray over these stations, that our eyes are open to see the glory of God in those moments when we share in communion. And it takes multiple people that do these things, Karen and Petra and others, or our musicians that spend hours and hours and hours practicing and playing and preparing to be able to lead you into the throne room of God. They're leading and showing you what it means to really worship the Lord in music. And I will tell you, last week was one of the most amazing times of worship I've ever experienced in my life. It was so powerful and so beautiful, and we honor all those people that spend all of that time doing those things. Or our welcome team. There's at least 20 people running around here, making sure people know where they're going, giving tours, talking to people, checking on people, making them feel at home. Or an auto ministry, like yesterday was our auto ministry day. And we were able to fix cars for people so that they can get on the road and break the cycle of poverty. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in our announcements today. But you have people like Brad Harmon and Thomas Bradley and Joey Heisch and Paul Osborne and Greg Bryan and Don Wheeler and a new friend Blake, and all kinds of people that serve in this way and serve in various ways. It takes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to make it work. Now, I will tell you, it is, for me, difficult and scary when you start naming names. Because inevitably you will forget somebody and someone is bound to get hurt. Please don't be hurt. I work without a net up here, okay? I'm doing the best that I can. And as things come to mind, I share those things with you. But at the same time, there is something incredibly beautiful about honoring people by name. To not just talk about something generically, but when you see someone doing good or catch someone doing good, that you honor them and show that this is important, because it's important that we do that. In fact, showing honor to someone else, which, by the way, if you're going to take notes today, inside the bulletin is a note page, so you can take it with you and follow along by filling in the blank. The first blank on there is showing honor to someone else is a gift that you can freely give that doesn't cost you a thing. Showing honor doesn't cost you anything, maybe a little time. And I know time is hard to come by in this world. We're all busy. But if you don't have enough time to honor someone, you need some new margins in your life. We can invest that in people. Honor, giving that away freely is something that we just need to find joy in. And it's easy to do. Honor is something you can give even if a person hasn't done something specific either. Sometimes it's just who they are, or where they've been, and we can honor them for that. The Bible talks about it all over the place. In fact, we find references to honor all the way from cover to cover. Like, for instance, one of the things we're to honor are the elderly in Leviticus chapter 19. In fact, if you read that passage, it talks about honoring the gray head. Do we have any gray hairs in here? So you have some gray hairs in here, that's right. So you are due honor for that. I honor you for your gray hair. There you go. For those of you that it's all gone, it's probably gray down there somewhere, but you know, that's how that goes. I want to honor the elderly because they love to drive in the fast lane, and that helps me to practice self-control. So that's good. And so I really am thankful for those kinds of things. We also honor parents. Exodus 20 and Ephesians 6, both Old Testament and New, talk about this. There's no age cap on that. We want to speak honorably of them to others, or honoring our authority and leaders, government officials and things. And you find that in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. This one may be difficult for you, depending on who's in office or who's in the presidency or whatever, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, there's always people that struggle with those things. And I got to tell you, even if you disagree, you're called to honor them. You read it for yourself and tell me if it says something different. It just does. We are to give them honor in that way because God planted them for a reason, even though we may not understand it. Or your church leaders, 1 Timothy chapter 5 talks about honoring the elders or pastors, shepherds that are leading the congregation. And in fact, if you're still confused, 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 7 says, honor everybody. And so if we're not sure we caught them all, it's very clear that we are to honor everyone, honor all people. And the best thing about honor is it's a renewable resource. You never run out. You can give honor all day long and still have honor to give. Does that make sense? That we can continue to give honor wherever we go. The question is, then, what would happen if we actually did it? What would happen if we created a culture of honor in this church? And by the way, let me say, what if you create a culture of honor? And when I say a culture, I mean that it's the norm. It is the every working part of the whole thing. What if you created a culture of honor in your homes? Within your marriages, with your children, at work, wherever you go, that there was a culture of honor that surrounded you. And that means here, what if you and I went out of our way to make sure we were always honoring somebody else, always lifting somebody else? And I got to tell you, it would be a great idea, wouldn't it? But it wouldn't be my idea. God had it way before I did. In fact, when you look at a place like Romans chapter 12, verse 10, it says, love one another with a brotherly affection. That was the sermon from last week. If you missed it, I really would love for you to go back and listen to it because it tells us something about being devoted, which very few people are devoted to anything anymore. But being devoted in brotherly love, and then it goes on to say, outdo one another in showing honor. You see, God's prescription for the church is that we outdo one another in showing honor to one another. And so again, the question is, what if that really was the norm? What if it was normal that we went out of our way to honor fellow believers and seekers all the time? Now, I don't think Renew does a bad job with it. I really don't. But I got to tell you, something would change if we didn't just look at giving honor when someone did something really obviously good and we honored them and that's good. But instead, we honor all the time, and that honor comes out of a sense of love and belonging with one another. That it really is our culture. It's not, and again, not just the church, but in every area of your life. Because ultimately, I can't create a culture of honor by myself, but you can create cultures of honor in your families. It's not too late. You can create cultures of honor around you at work, and you certainly can help me as we work hard to create a culture of honor in this place. Here's what I know. If we do that, giving honor impacts people in beautiful and dramatic ways. You know, I put a post out on Facebook this week that said, catch someone doing good and honor them for it publicly. By the way, this is a great way to honor people. It's great to honor someone directly, like I can honor John directly, face to face. But there's also something powerful about honoring someone publicly where everyone gets to experience that and see that honor. You know as well as I do, that is incredibly, incredibly impactful. And so this week, David Crownover, one of our Renew guys, did that. And he did a great job with it and was honoring people in various places. In fact, one of his coworkers honored them publicly. And you could see the response and how much love that put into that person's heart, that they were being honored for something that they just do as their job. And so many people think that, well, I don't want to honor someone, it's their job. No, we still can create a culture of honor even if it's your job. Because we're called to it. And it impacts people. It changes people's lives if we will do it. And it fulfills the law of Christ. It is a way to feel loved and valued and affirmed. It deepens relationships. It heals broken relationships if we were to go out of our way to honor people. And it is fuel to serve. But let me give you a caution. In the church world, you talk about those things at conferences. Like if you will get good at honoring your people, they'll serve more. And although that's probably true, would you agree it's easier to serve if someone honors you for it? Can we be transparent enough to say that's true? Everybody with me? Your job isn't nearly as stinky if someone is slapping you on the back every day and going, man, you knocked it out of the park. You're doing such a great job. Hey, everybody, just want to make an announcement. They did their job with excellence. If you get honored that way, it does create fuel. However, there's a danger in it that we end up serving because we want honor from people. And it's very dangerous. The Bible talks about over and over, like John 12:43, for they loved human praise more than praise from God. You see, here's the deal. You've got an audience of one. When you serve, you have an audience of one, and it's not me. You don't have to impress me. You don't have to do it because Spencer asked you to. You do it because you do it as if you're doing it for the Lord himself. Even if you feed somebody, you're doing it as if you're feeding the Lord himself. And if you're doing it only to get praise and honor from somebody on Facebook, you're in trouble. It will wreck you because sometime they're going to forget. And someone's not going to see it. Someone's not going to realize the behind-the-scenes ministry. And there are a billion things going on behind the scenes that no one ever sees. And I got to tell you, sometimes that's really beneficial. I love it that someone can come up here and take out the trash and no one even knows who did it. And there's no honor given other than from the Lord himself. And that's all that's really necessary at the end of the day. Because you see other places like Galatians 1:10, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? See, Paul kind of gives the indication that you can't do both, but I think that's interesting. But it all comes down to motive. It comes down to the heart. He says, or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Paul understands that if I'm just trying to do this in order to make people happy, make people think I'm awesome, I'm going to have a hard time letting that be service to Christ. Are you with me? There's another one that's even harder, Matthew 6:2. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. In other words, the religious leaders were giving money to the poor people so that people would see it and say, man, you're amazing. You gave all that money away. And that's why they were doing it. But we see in Matthew it says, truly I tell you, they've received their reward in full. That means if you get something from humans, if you get rewards from them, and that was your motivation for it, that's all the reward is from humans, not from God. We want to do things that honor God. This has to be our ultimate fuel, that we're doing things to honor him, and he will honor us in his own way. Probably not on Facebook. You know, I'm not sure that God has a Facebook account. In fact, I'm pretty sure he banned it in heaven. That's just what I got to say. But it's important that we're doing things to honor God. Honoring other people also keeps us humble. You know, when you honor someone, in essence, what you're doing is putting them above yourself. You are saying this person has done something that I haven't done or can't do or whatever. And in a culture that is absolutely saturated with self-interest, honoring somebody else helps us to live in that essentialness of the Christian life where it is that we're to elevate other people above ourselves, that we can take the second seat. Ultimately, we honor one another because we're being obedient to God. It's obedience to God. If you want any other answer, you can look at it and you can find all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, obedience to God is the most important thing. It is. And he calls us not just to honor, but to outdo one another in that honor. Now, I've had people ask me about this before, like, is Paul really saying that it's a competition? That we have a competition to honor people? Well, I got to tell you, I don't know if that was really the intent of Paul's heart, but I will tell you that is what the text says. The text is very clear that you are to love one another with a brotherly affection. In other words, we love one another as if we came from the same womb. That was God's intention for the church. And out of that love for one another, we honor one another, but not just honor them, but outdo it. Here's why I think it says that. I don't think it's as much about a competition like, oh yeah, you want to honor me? I'm going to honor you. Oh yeah, well I'm going to honor you this way. Oh yeah, no, I'm going to honor you. And don't you ever say that again. You know, and then it turns into a weird thing. Because people are weird. And that stuff happens, you know. But I think so often in our life we get into reciprocal type things. It's sort of like the how you doing dilemma. Everybody knows the how you doing dilemma, right? How you doing dilemma is, how you doing? I'm from Kansas City. That's how you say it, right? How you's doing? And then someone would go, fine. How you doing? Fine. And then we continue. Here's the truth. No one actually cares what anyone says. Am I right? Like, we barely even wait. You could be walking down the street, how you doing? And you're 12 steps past them by the time they ask you how you're doing. We don't really ask because we want to know. It's something that we do to break silence, and it's become culturally acceptable. It's the how you doing dilemma. But we do it in a reciprocal nature where I know that if I ask you this, you're going to ask me in return. And I think the same thing happens with honor sometimes, that we want to honor someone because in a backhanded way, I really want you to honor me. And it's really risky and really dangerous. And so instead of the reciprocal nature, I think what Paul is saying is that we don't wait to give honor to someone after we've received it, which is probably human nature, but instead, you be first. You honor someone not because you want it back, but because that's what you're called to. And in fact, outdo one another in giving that honor. Go above and beyond in order to honor somebody else. This has to be what he is talking about. And so, before we go any further then, now that we have a foundation laid of a culture of honor and what it means and what it looks like, we need to make sure we actually understand the definition of the word honor. Now, you may think that's strange and everybody would know, but I don't think everybody knows what honor means. And if we're to outdo one another in it, we should probably know what it is. And so when you begin to look at secular psychology and sociologists, they really have no clue what honor is. And in fact, they will say it. There are many authors out there that are sociologists in the secular sphere that will say to you, we live in a post-honor society, and the word honor itself absolutely has no meaning anymore. That's what most sociologists agree and believe about the idea of honor in America. Now, I will tell you, I agree that there are difficulties in consistency with understanding what honor is. I think many people will have different perspectives of what it is. I think it can be confusing from a society perspective, but I totally disagree that it is non-existent. Honor still exists, and it must exist. But we have to understand what it is. And I don't think it's exactly the same as respect. I think respect is maybe a component of it. But respect is generally you've done something and you've earned it. But honor is different. It's not always about something that someone has earned. Sometimes it's just who people are. It's also different than politeness. And I think in the South, we think everybody's honorable in honoring because they say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. But I think that's being polite. I think it's a subset of honor, but it's not the fullness of what honor actually is. The last thing, when you look at Wikipedia to find out what Wikipedia thinks, because of course that's what's right? No. But Wikipedia has a perspective on honor. Here's what Wikipedia's perspective on honor is. Avoid intentionally offending other people. That you give honor when you avoid intentionally offending someone. But it makes sense in our culture that everybody's offended by everything. And so the idea was the way you show honor is you don't intentionally offend somebody. Unless, of course, they really disagree with you. And then you can go for it, right? I mean, that's the perspective of the society that we live in. It's why everybody walks around offended all the time. Because they have a perspective that everybody has been dishonorable to them. And if someone's dishonored me, I need to protect my honor, so watch out. That's the world we live in. Am I wrong? I'm not wrong. And so we have this perspective all around us all the time. And by the way, everybody is very concerned about offending people except God. No one cares if God is offended anymore. But we need to be concerned about those kinds of things. Most secular definitions just have to do with not being mean. And that's hard sometimes to not be mean. Anyone want to amen that one? 2 of you are willing to own that. It's not always easy to be nice to people. But there has to be more to that than honor. And so the only thing we can do is look to the Bible, because the Bible is the best definer of itself. This what does the Bible say honor really is when you look at Romans 12:10. And it says, outdo one another in giving honor. Well, what is it? The word in Greek there, the original word is time. Time is the word. It means assigning substantial value. That you say, this is substantially valuable. I'm placing great value on you. That is honor. That's how you honor. Or giving favor and consideration to someone. That is honoring them. But my favorite is acknowledging preciousness. Where you look at someone and you determine that they are precious in your sight. This is how we honor people. You know, in my life, I've experienced the feeling of being valued in lots of different ways over the years. Received all kinds of compliments and awards and newspaper articles and things. But I got to be honest with you, most of the time that's because of a group effort somewhere. It's usually not me out there just, doing something by myself. It's usually a group of people. But for myself, the things that I have seen as most precious to me have not been awards, not been newspaper articles. It's things like this, things that kids have drawn for me. I have scrapbooks all over the house full of these things that are saying thank you and I love you for your awesome hair and stuff, and dinosaurs and all those things. But I thank you for teaching us about God. Those kinds of notes, these are the things that honor me. I love these kinds of things. Or someone decided to make me a puppet of me and name him Stuart. There's a picture. Here Stuart is, right? So next time I take a sabbatical, Stuart's preaching. There you go. That's all? No, I'm just kidding. Or, for Pastor Appreciation Month in October last year, I got one of the best gifts ever. And it's this entire scrapbook full of families that wanted to tell me how Renew has impacted their lives. Those are amazing things that I will keep all of my life. In my funeral, this will be up there somewhere. I want to actually hold it. That was my plan, okay? I wasn't sure you were with me. I just want to make sure. So, yeah, these are beautiful things. Anonymous cards. Someone writes me an anonymous card every week or two and sends them to me. I have no idea who it is. And I'm not sure I want to know. It's such a beautiful thing to be able to get these cards and be encouraged that way. Some of you are weird and you think that a bag of Brussels sprouts next to my car is honoring. For those of you that don't know me, they're evil. I controlled myself and didn't put a picture of evil Brussels sprouts on screen, but I want you to know, for those of you that honor me with Brussels sprouts, I run over them with my car. There you go. That's what they're good for. But the question is for you. I mean, how have you been shown that you're precious? In your life, how have you been shown that you're precious, that you are highly valued by someone? How have people demonstrated it for you in the past? And hopefully it's not too hard for you to think of times that that's been the case. Hopefully it's easy for you to come up with stuff. But I got to step back from that now that I've said it and say this. There are times that we're not going to feel honored. And I know that that's probably true of you. And when I asked the question, how have you been shown you're precious? Your mind probably went to places where you have not felt that way. Because I think it's part of the human condition. Maybe you've even thought about how you've been dishonored. I will tell you, that is one way Satan loves to cause division. Is to make people think, I'm not valued. I'm not precious. I'm not important. And the devil is a liar. But he does it to us all the time when we don't get thanked for something or recognized for a job well done. And I got to be honest with you, I fail at this. I see amazing things happening, and I don't always think to say, that's awesome. I just don't think about it sometimes. It's not because I don't care. It's because I get busy and get wrapped up in myself at times. That's just being transparent. Hopefully you can identify with that in your own life, that we see good things happening, but we don't always honor. But man, what would happen if we did? What if every time we were in there and we were honoring people? Because it hurts to feel ignored or not being noticed or heard. I got to tell you, for whatever reason, there's been a theme over the last couple weeks. And I think it's because we're coming out of summer. And I've had multiple people, including someone this morning, say to me, I purposely did not come to church for a few weeks to see if anyone would reach out. Let me just tell you that that comes from a feeling that you're not precious. It comes from this kind of topic. But let me also say to you that if you have deep and close relationships here, and if you have people that you make a point to be with and sit with every Sunday when you're here, and you're involved in a life group or a small group or a Bible study consistently, it probably will never happen. You would probably never be ignored. In your mind. You wouldn't even think about it because there would be people there that are engaged in your life. But if you're out on the fringes and wondering if anyone's paying attention, you are setting yourself up for a satanic attack to make you think you do not matter. And you do. You must stop believing those lies. And hear it from me, please, because it's important. Hopefully you have felt honored here and in your families and at work and all those things. But whether you have or haven't up to this point, the Bible has something to say to you and to me about giving honor and receiving it. And so I want to take you to a place where we see the greatest example of this, and it's from Jesus himself for just a couple of minutes. And this is in John chapter 13. And so I want to take you back on a journey a couple thousand years ago to first century Jerusalem, where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Now, leading up to this passage, Jesus has spent the majority of his time dealing with the religious leaders, Jewish leaders, and, of course, all the people that are around. And now he's starting to narrow his focus in as he gets closer and closer to the cross on a small group of disciples. Now, another side part of this is that in those days, they didn't have cars and they didn't have bicycles to ride around on. When you walked in the dirt. And you most likely wore sandals, if shoes at all, and your feet got dirty. And if it rained, they got muddy. And so when you would show up to someone's home for a party, or if you've been invited to dinner, it was customary to have someone at the door a slave generally to wash your feet. Now, also, this is partly self-preservation because in those days when you ate a meal, you didn't sit at a high table with your feet down below the table and everybody ate. Usually you would lay on the floor, on an elbow, on pillows, and your feet are basically in someone else's face. And if you walked here behind the cattle train, I need you to have clean feet before we eat grapes. Everybody with me? Okay, and so this is self-preservation. And so they would have a slave there, although what's interesting, if you go back to the Midrash Makelta, which is basically a commentary from rabbis on the Old Testament, and you go back to the Midrash Makelta on Exodus, you would find that it says that a Jewish slave was not required to wash a master's feet. They weren't required to, which is interesting. But often they would as a sign of devotion. And occasionally a disciple would wash the feet of a teacher or a rabbi or something like that. And so now this brings us to how they did it. And so often you would find what Jesus does in John chapter 13, verse 5, is what they would do. They would kneel with a pitcher of water and a pan and a towel. That's what we see happening right here with Jesus. Then he poured water into a basin, began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And so that was the normal pattern. And you see other examples in Scripture that are similar, although more intimate. Like in Luke chapter 7, you have a woman who washes Jesus' feet with her hair and her tears, which is amazing. Now, if you are having a dinner party and you can't afford to have someone, a servant or whatever, do it, it's possible that one of your early guests might do it. This would have been part of the culture. But for an early guest to show up at a dinner party, think about that for a second. You show up at a dinner party, what do you typically do? How can I help? Right? Most people do that. They walk into our house, it's dinner time. How can I help? Can I help make the salad? Can I help do this? Can I do that? Whatever. And so most people do it. Well, in those days, the way you would be able to help, if you're coming to somebody's house that doesn't have a servant on staff, I might ask you to wash the people's feet. But that's taking a very humble position. Would you agree? Yeah, if you could just wash all the manure off everybody's feet when they walk in, it'd be great, I would really like that because I got to make the salad, or whatever. And so that might be something that would happen. So sometimes that would happen. But here's what's interesting. So now we have Jesus and the disciples in the kataluma, the upper room. And no one has taken on the role to wash the feet. They don't have a servant there. It's sort of a private gathering, a secret gathering. But the disciples are all there, gathered for this Passover meal. And the room was full of proud hearts and stinky feet. That's Chuck Swindoll's statement. The question is, why didn't one of them? These are the guys that have walked with Jesus for 3 years now. And none of them are willing to take on the role of the servant. None of them are willing to take on the role to wash the feet of the others. Well, the other Gospels actually tell us why. We don't see it in John, but in the other Gospels, you see that as the Last Supper begins, they're actually arguing with one another on who's the greatest one. They're arguing with each other. Just picture it for a second. Not the picture that you see everybody sitting on the same side of the table and Jesus in the middle. Not that picture, but they're lounging and they're talking and whatever, and eating dates or something, and getting ready for the Passover meal, and they're talking about who out of them is the greatest apostle. That's actually what's happening. So if that's how they're thinking, of course none of them are going to take on the role of the slave, because in their minds, the slave is the least of them, right? But they're confused. They obviously haven't paid very good attention to what Jesus has been talking about, like Matthew 23, 5 through 12. Listen to what he says. The greatest among you will be your servant. The greatest among you. Oh, so you're concerned about who's the greatest. Well, let me tell you, the greatest among you is the one who is the servant. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled. I really don't want God to have to humble me. I've been there. Been there. Anybody been there? Where God had to humble you? Don't take that class twice. Pass it the first time. Don't exalt yourself, but if you exalt yourself, you will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted, will be honored. God will reward those things if you are humble. And so in this picture then, they're all sitting around talking about who's the greatest, and I can just envision Jesus in the middle of all this, listening to all the goofy things that they're saying, and at some point he just can't take it anymore, and so Jesus gets up and demonstrates what true servanthood, what honor looks like, what leadership looks like, and he washes their feet. But understand this too. He's washing the feet of a person that will betray him. Judas, the story of Judas comes after this. And you look down in John chapter 13, verse 21. He washes the feet of Judas, whom he knows will betray him. Think about that for a second. Taking on such a humble position that you're willing to wash the feet of the guy who's about to go betray you to your death. He also washes the person who will deny him 3 times, Peter. Ultimately, though, all of them deserted him. And yet he washes their feet. I know it's hard to serve people that don't reciprocate the love. But guess what? Jesus made a very clear example that is what we do. From time to time, anyway. The text tells us that he loved them till the end. Because it makes us wonder, why in the world would he do it? Well, the beginning of this, in John chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of the world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." Why did he do it? He loved them. Honoring them, elevating them above himself in this moment was an act of love. Serving them as a leader was an act of love, and he loved them to the end. That means that even as they deny him and disown him and betray him, he still loves them. And that's good news for us, because Jesus knows you and I just as good as he knew them. And he can still love us regardless of our ridiculousness at times, despite all the stupid things that we say and do. But the devil was at work, messing with Judas, and Judas was being tempted to betray him. And why does Judas go over the edge and finally do it? I don't know. Maybe the final straw was Judas couldn't believe that this was the Messiah who was on his feet, washing feet, who was on his hands and feet, down at the ground, washing someone else's feet. Maybe he just couldn't understand it. And he thought it was a sign of weakness because he was confused, because so many people do think it's weakness to elevate someone else above themselves, but it's not weakness. So we get to verse 3 and 4. He got up, this is Jesus, from the Lord's Supper, and he laid aside his outer garment. He laid it aside. Now, the word there in Greek I love is tithonai, which means he laid aside. He took off his outer garment and laid it aside, tithonai. But later on you see the same word used when Jesus lays down his life. See, I can't help but think that John is giving us a picture, a foreshadowing of laying down his life by laying down his outer self, by laying down the outer garment. I think it's on purpose. Because, by the way, if you really are a good Bible student and dig deeper, you see that when Jesus takes his life up again, it's the same wording that Jesus uses to put his outer garment back on. He tithonai, he lays down himself in that sense. And he takes a towel, he wraps it around himself, and he begins to wash them and serve them, to elevate them above himself. Serving happens without an invitation or an announcement. He did not just say, "Hey guys, look at me, this is what you're supposed to do." He just does it. He sees a need and he accomplishes the need. Verse 6 through 8. He finally gets to Peter. And imagine being Peter, and you've seen all this go on. You see all these people having this happen to them. And the closer Jesus gets to you, you've got to be thinking, what in the world? My master is acting like a slave. He's confused. It's scandalous to him. Maybe reckless. There's that word again we used last week so many times. Reckless, by the way, is not always bad. Reckless just means I'm unconcerned with the risk or the consequences. I'm unconcerned with it. I'm going to do it anyway. And Jesus, in this example, is using that. Although maybe in Peter's mind he thought it was bad, but it wasn't bad. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And he's demonstrating, but Peter didn't understand it. He didn't understand that a leader has to be a servant and elevate others above self, because he thought it was weak. But the second seat is not a position of weakness. The second seat is not weakness, despite what all the popular leadership books say. I've read a ton of leadership books, and so many of them continually say that if you're going to elevate someone else, never elevate them above yourself, because someone else might see them as the leader. It's just ridiculousness. But it's because the secular culture doesn't understand. They don't understand the countercultural nature of the gospel or any of it. And so the world sees servanthood and honor as weakness, but it's not. It's the opposite. And of course, there's the other challenge for Peter, and that is to have someone else serve you. And I know it's difficult sometimes to have someone else serve you, isn't it? It feels strange. And we don't want other people to serve us. We don't want other people to honor us. But ultimately, it's because of our own pride and self-reliance that we're afraid to let someone else honor us, because we don't know how to accept it. But we must learn humility and allow other people to serve us as we serve them. Because if you never learn how to let people serve you, you rob other Christians of being able to do what they're called to do. We have to learn how to let people honor and serve, not for our own good, but because we're called to it. So Peter refuses, but Jesus says, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. So Peter had to let Jesus do this so he could learn humility. Wash one another's feet, Jesus says. In other words, you've seen what I've done, now you do it. Take on the role of the servant leader. Serve and love, honor someone else. So what? Why is this so important? Well, it begs the question, how's the story about foot washing an example of showing honor? Well, here it is. We live in a culture that is of selfishness, a culture of self-centeredness, of cynicism and cut-downs. Just watch TV, it's everywhere. We live in a me-first society. But honoring someone is about elevating them above yourself and actually meaning it, which is another story. Attributing value to someone else simply because they're a child of God, or demonstrating that the other person is precious through your words and through your actions. And so what do we do with it? Well, here it is. Live a life of honor. Start by living a life that's worthy of honor. Live the life of honor. 2 Corinthians 8:21 says, for we aim at what is honorable, not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of men. To live a life of honor and then honor others with your life, with your words and your actions and your attitudes. Romans 12:10 says, love one another with brotherly affection and outdo one another in showing honor. But it takes building a culture of that. It takes building a culture of honor in our homes. What would happen in your marriages if you really worked at honoring the other one every day? Like you put a note in your phone at 7 a.m. that said, how am I going to honor my wife today? And then you work at showing honor. Same thing, wives to your husbands. How are you going to show honor to your children and honor them, creating a culture of honor? How many marriages would be saved if we just could create a culture of honor in our homes? Or create a culture of honor in our schools, or workplaces, or social media. Whoa, now, what would happen if we had a culture of honor in our social media posts? That we went about doing good and honoring people as opposed to the opposite of all that, which is gossip and slander. How would it change our communities, and how would it change this place if we really had that? 3 years ago, here at Renew in our staff meetings, we decided that we were going to honor one another, and we took weeks to do it. And we would pick one person out in the group, and everybody would honor them one day, and it was amazing. It built relationships stronger than ever before. And it was stuff like with Carmen. She took up my webcam technology, because when Renew started, I used a webcam to broadcast on the internet. Very few of you would remember such a thing, because it was horrendous. But she took webcam technology, because that was the extent of my technical knowledge. She turned it into a full production online campus. Or Dixie, I'll tell you, I've never seen a better operations person all my life. And I've hired COO-type people in my corporate days, and I've never seen someone more effective, more capable than Dixie at keeping 1,000 things up in the air and running all the time. She's brilliant. Or Ryan has grown from a youth volunteer in the teen ministry to being one of our pastors here at Renew, and he is amazing at it, and he has grown in amazing ways as a pastor here. And probably the greatest compliment of honor that I could give him is to say that I trust him to step into this place along with Ron when I'm not here, and to trust that you will hear truth. I honor him for that. Or Natalie, who has the most tender and loving heart of any person for kids I've ever seen, her catchphrase is, I want them all. That's what she says. I want them all. I want all the kids. I want all the babies. I want to teach them about Jesus. And she writes her own curriculum to make sure that the things that they're being taught are true and biblical. She's diligent and focused in everything I've ever seen her put her hands to. Or Terry, who has a beautiful brain. She's an amazing coach, an amazing mentor. And she coaches me a lot. And I ask for that. I ask her, how do I work through these situations? Help me to understand this better. And has become a great sounding board for me. And she does it for many others and mentors, especially women, through grief. And does an amazing job with that. Or Dawn, who created one of the biggest daycares in the city, if not the biggest one, from scratch. As we were opening up a new building next door, it was a crazy adventure, but she did it and did it with excellence. And probably the thing I'm most proud of and honor her for is that it's not just daycare, it is ministry every day to over 100 kids, to teach them and train them up in the way of the Lord. And I honor Pete and Brad and Lauren and Creighton and Jason, who support our staff in that from home. Or Melody, Maddie, Bentley, Quinn, Marley, Merrick, Colin, Carter, Braylon, and Brecken, and my kids, Jake and Hannah, as they are alongside and they're supporting and seeing their parents work diligently in ministry. I honor them for that. And it's not just our staff, but like Brandy Sykes posted on Facebook this week that she's been sober for 4 years. That's worthy of honor. Or Jerry Hartman, who's an amazing advocate for suicide prevention. Or my wife, Jennifer, who will tell you that her primary ministry has always been to take care of me. And apparently that's a full-time job. She does it with excellence and grace and beauty. And my Hannah, we take her to college today. All of her stuff's piled in our living room right now. And we'll truck her off to college. And she'll begin an education degree so that she can go and be a missionary in another country in 3 years or so. And I honor her for that. I honor my son Jake, who can play anything with strings. And on I could go. Or our shepherds, Dean, Jerry, and Dave, along with their wives, take on the spiritual weight of interceding for a church, for this church, and protecting this place. Or Chris Hart, who seems to actually do everything here. Or Thomas Hartman, who will help anyone, anytime. He is so consistent in a world of inconsistencies. Or Burke and Cindy, who work behind the scenes all the time. You know, our kitchen flooded from all the rain that came in, and Burke drove here from Texarkana just to fix it himself. Those are amazing things to me, and I got to tell you, there's hundreds more, and I wish I could name them all, and if I had enough hours in the day, I would love to do it, but I would never get it done because there are 1,000 things that go on here that I don't even see. But our world is malnourished and starving for genuine, loving, life-giving relationships. And if we could learn how to create a culture of honor here, it would satisfy that hunger. It would satisfy that need. I was at a funeral this week, listening to them honor a woman that I didn't even know, actually. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be amazing if we didn't wait for people to die before we honored them? What if we actually had a culture of honor where we honored people so well that at the funeral, all we had to do was celebrate? Because everybody already knew we spent all of our life together honoring one another, outdoing one another in honor. And so instead of waiting for someone to die to honor them, let's pray that God will give us eyes to see and ears to hear and see the things that are going on. To set reminders in your phone for important events, for birthdays, for death days, for holidays, for doctor's appointments, and reach out and love on people. And if you say you're going to pray, write it down and do it. Or to be present. Honor people with your presence. Honor this church by making this a priority. And if you aren't feeling honored right now, if you're feeling like you've been missed or passed over, here's the answer. Double your efforts to honor somebody else. Not because of reciprocal nature, but it may be God's way to tell you it's time for you to step up and you to really honor someone. But make sure that you do it because you want the honor from God, not from somebody else. Quit worrying about your position. Quit worrying about who's greatest in the kingdom. Tith and I, lay it down, grab a towel, get to work. You don't need an invitation or announcement. Give someone else the credit. Make someone else look and sound good. And always take the second seat. Elevating someone else above yourself because you actually mean it. This is the way of Christ, and this is how we begin to outdo one another in showing honor. And so today as we finish, I want to invite you to take time to honor Christ and his sacrifice. As you share in communion, to remember the death, the body and blood broken and shed for us. As you share and take a piece of the bread and drink the cup, it reminds us and it allows us to honor Christ for what he has set you free from. And then in the process, we'll have 3 songs. Take time to go honor somebody. Don't just go hide in your seat. Look around. Ask God who needs some love and go honor them with your presence. Go honor them with your words. Honor them with your actions. Go honor somebody, because to create a culture of honor begins right here. So let's do it. It's scary because it's weird, because our culture is not a culture of honor, but we can have a culture of honor, but it's going to take every one of us to elevate someone above ourselves. Let's do this because Christ calls us to it, church. So let's pray. Father, thank you for this moment that we can come together and honor you in communion, to take the body and blood as representations of how you died in our place. Let us honor you in this time of communion, and let us take the time to really and truly honor one another. Let us create this culture of honor in this place, and let it grow and grow, so that we can fulfill your call to us, the church. It's in the name of Jesus we pray.